evening, and welcome to What's Your Story, part 2 of Simply Smiles with my very special guest, Betsy Van Loon. I'm your host, James Ransom Reed Jr. In part 1, we got to know Betsy and her background and her family, what motivates her, and we had just started talking about Simply Smiles, how it was founded, and what its purpose was. And we're going to resume that now. Betsy, let's go, shall we?
All right, Jim.
All right. Now, how is it funded? How's
The reason I'm pausing is that funding for the organization has changed over the last few years. The children's home in Mexico is supported completely by fundraising and donation.
okay?
The organization has chosen, and I think I can say this without getting in trouble, decided to fund themselves and not accept any money from the state, from Oaxaca State or the federal government of Mexico, to avoid any opportunities for corruption, etc. Just, it's easier, it's cleaner. I honestly don't know what it costs to run the children's home there. All of the folks who work there are Mexicans from Oaxaca State. The head of the children's home, Gabby, was born in the backseat of a car in Oaxaca. She actually grew up, has loving parents, but grew up in a children's home. It was a family decision because it gave Gabby the opportunity to get a better education. And that's what her family wanted for her. So it was sort of the equivalent of sending a child to boarding school. They sent them to a children's home so they could continue to go to school and get fed at the same time.
Sure.
And Gabby met Brian, the head of Simply Smiles, and was able to come to the United States. I'm not exactly sure what years, but she completed her degree in business at Sacred Heart. I'm pretty sure it was Sacred Heart. On full scholarship, and then returned to Mexico. There was no strings attached to this, and decided to become head of the children's home there. It wasn't as if, we'll get you through school if you do this. It was, you come and get your education, get to do whatever you want. And she chose to continue in the role in Oaxaca City, running the children's home.
You know, it occurred to me that this is part 2, and some of our viewers may have tuned into part 2 and missed part 1. So quickly, just recap, what is the purpose of Simply Smiles?
The purpose of Simply Smiles as a not-for-profit is to provide, we have 2 children's villages, one in Oaxaca City in Mexico and one on the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe Reservation in South Dakota. So the Oaxaca village existed first, and to a certain extent what's happening on the reservation is modeled after that, though the 2 situations are different. On the reservation in South Dakota, the village is new right now.
Betsy, let me interrupt you for a second. How is it decided, or was it decided, to be in Mexico and South Dakota?
It really is the life story of the founder of Simply Smiles. His original career, if you can call that, it was as a rock climber. And someone who led guided tours to rock climbing in different areas in Mexico.
That's the connection.
He ended up in a village, going to stay overnight, stayed there for 3 months. Helped out, came back to the United States, and started figuring out how you form a not-for-profit and how you can get busy supporting the people in this rural community in Mexico. And then was encouraged by a Lakota man, Teokasin Whitehorse. He's a musician that Brian met here in Connecticut and said, You think you've seen poverty, Brian? Come to my res. So Brian did, and again, basically didn't leave. And that's the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe Reservation in central South Dakota.
Wow, that's... Betsy, from your perspective, what were some of the challenges this organization faces? What are some of the challenges?
The ones that I know best, because I've spent most of my time volunteering with Simply Smiles in South Dakota.
Yes.
So I can talk most effectively about that. They're numerous in South Dakota. So Jim, let me give you a little geography on the reservation, if I may.
Please.
The reservation, the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe Reservation, is pretty much in the center of the state of South Dakota. It's the size of the state of Connecticut, with between 9,000 and 11,000 people.
Okay.
Whereas Connecticut has a population, I think, of about 3 million.
Okay.
So it's very isolated, very rural, very scarce, scantily populated, very impoverished. So to do anything requires bringing people, money, supplies over great distances.
So because of its location, accessibility is a major problem.
Correct.
Okay.
It's hard to get there.
Okay.
It's a hard place to stay. There is no place to stay on the res. So for the first few years as volunteers, we slept on the floor of the local community center, because that was it. And then we built a bunkhouse, and it was luxury by comparison, because you didn't have to sleep on the floor anymore. There is running water in the community itself. But where we as volunteers stayed, no running water, no showers. So it was bottled water. Work hard for a week, go home. The next group of volunteers would come on and take over for you.
What organizations does Simply Smiles work in conjunction with? Is it part of different organizations?
No, not really. As I said, it's independent, which makes it small and nimble. And
Okay.
it has, as an organization, has changed its focus, and I'd say sharpened it over time, which is a good thing for a not-for-profit to do, to stay very focused. So initially on the reservation, we stayed in the community center, developed a small garden there, horseshoe pit, a playground, a nice place for the kids in the community to be.
Yes.
So they'd come over for some camp and recreational opportunities. Volunteers also helped build some housing in the area, because the housing stock is very poor.
Yes.
And slowly the vision came of, we do this incredibly well with this children's home in Mexico.
Yes.
Can we replicate that
Over there, yeah.
in South Dakota?
Yes.
Recognizing that social services and government and history and tradition in those two places are very, very different. So Brian, head of Simply Smiles, over time had built an incredible amount of trust among tribal leaders, which is unusual for a white person to be able to do, because people knew that this guy sticks around. He doesn't do a few things, pat yourself on the back, feel good about what you did, and then go home.
He walks the walk.
He walks the walk. So found the money and proposed the idea of a village of foster homes for Lakota children.
Hold that thought, because I'm going to get to the foster home. But I wanted to ask you this. Wanted to ask you this. You told me that you cried when you first saw the village in Dakota, in South Dakota. What happened, Betsy? Why did you cry?
First of all, the reservation itself, I'm not a prairie girl. I love New England, but the prairie is gorgeous. It rolls, it's very beautiful. So the physical beauty is not the issue. I mean, this is big sky country.
Yes.
I wouldn't want to be there in the winter. Extreme cold, extreme wind. I cried. We had gone over to Ford's property. Ford's one of the elders in the community, and on his property is a FEMA trailer that had been brought to him, I think, out of the areas devastated by Katrina. So it was somebody's idea that you move the trailers from Mississippi and Louisiana to South Dakota. And this trailer, it was filled with, it was a wreck. It was filled with garbage and trash. In other words, this was brought to Ford and just placed on his property, and he was supposed to live in it. But it was uninhabitable from the moment, I'm assuming, that when it left the South. And yet, the government, I don't know, somebody's idea of this being a good thing to do. And this is where Ford was supposed to live. So I just cried. I think in large part out of frustration. Sadness, yes, because here's this very dignified man. It's like, but frustration. The waste. And I'm assuming at some level those were our tax resources, at quote unquote, at work. You know, it's just a total waste. A total waste. And that's been my experience for the most part about what comes to the reservations is everybody's cast-offs, leftovers, whatever somebody else doesn't want. You just dump it there. And being mindful that the reservation is a sovereign nation.
That seems to have seared your very soul.
It does. You know, I'm the nice girl from Connecticut, right?
New Jersey.
Well,
Yeah.
I lived here longer than any place else. I was 3 when I left New Jersey, but there's something. We talked about in the first segment about my mother. Don't waste things. And here was a waste of financial resources, housing resources, human resources, all wasted. That wasn't going to fly with my mom.
Do you encourage people to learn about the abject swath of poverty in our nation and the people who are marginalized, left behind?
I try, Jim. People aren't always interested
In learning that stuff.
in learning, quote unquote, that stuff. Also, I think here in Connecticut, we have a very particular view of Native Americans and tribes, because the tribes here are extremely wealthy through their casino operations, and that is, you know, that's not the universal model at all. And the Lakota people have opted not to put casinos on their reservations because they just don't want that as being a revenue source, where here in Connecticut we take that as a standard. I did on one of my trips travel with a group of youth from the Mohegan tribe.
Yes.
What an inspirational group of young people. Very empowered, very aware of their backgrounds, of how hard, in most parts, their mothers had to work to prove their tribal relationship through their ancestry. Amazing young people.
You know, Betsy, earlier in part 1, you talked about Avon Congregational Church, your affiliation with church, your spiritual outlook on life. I'm wondering how much of that experience, your religious education, enhancement, and beliefs, have guided your steps in what you do in terms of trying to make life better for people?
There was the sort of organizational component, because starting with the volunteer trips in 2012, it was organized through the Farmington Valley UCC churches.
Yes.
So there's that very practical piece, but the longer term motivation, and we talked about this earlier, of Jesus saying to us, follow me. It doesn't, you can't just sit there and talk, you have to do something. And sometimes we're very effective and sometimes we're not. But follow me. He wasn't going to judge you for your efforts, but follow me. Get busy. Do something, and also in following Jesus, oftentimes you're going to end up where you're not particularly comfortable.
Ooh.
And I'm not comfortable on the res, more comfortable than I used to be, but it's not a comfortable place to be.
As we enter the Christmas season and the birth story, follow me.
Follow me.
This is what I want you to do. I never promised you a rose garden.
I didn't get one. Kind of work. No. Follow me, and then also put your trust in the people who know the local situation better than you do. And there were some volunteers, they didn't get invited back, but they felt like after a week they knew better than the staff, that they knew better than even the Lakota people themselves about needs and solutions. It's like, no, that's not working for me. Listen to the elders in the village. Listen to the staff that even as at the age of 26 or 27 had been working on the reservation for 10 years. Someone as younger than my children, they know more. Listen, follow. And Simply Smiles has been a good leader, particularly I think in the development of the children's foster village on the res, because the need for foster care to keep Native children on the reservation in their culture and close to their families in hopes of family reunification. That vision is, started way out here, and now it's narrowed and focused. And again, that village is led by Marcella Gilbert, who's a native, as a Lakota woman.
Lakota people, yes.
Yeah, it's Lakota people taking care of Lakota
people, yeah.
Yeah, on the rest. And us white folks, we can be in the background, better raise some money,
Yeah.
and then follow me, turn it over to the people who know best what the needs of their own community are.
Now, how many years have you been going there, Betsy?
10?
So you must have developed some personal relationships with people.
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, it's hard because you see the elders and the children only a week a year.
Yeah.
And before the pandemic, I was able to arrange with some incredible funding through Miss Porter's school. For 2 summers, we brought 4 of the teenage girls out here to Connecticut to go to a special leadership program for middle school aged girls. So I developed a better relationship with those girls because I saw a little bit more of them. And that unfortunately had to go away with the pandemic. And now Simply Smiles, rightfully so, is keeping its focus on the foster village. So probably for a while not branching back out again into different programs.
Sure.
Yeah.
Betsy, how do you find the people in South Dakota? Do you find them, are they bitter? Do they hate the white men or?
No, they don't seem to. The elders are all survivors of the boarding school experience, which I think people are learning more and more about through the unearthing of children's remains at the boarding school in Canada.
Yes.
That was in the news. So the elders were, as children, forcibly removed, and I mean forcibly,
Yes.
from their homes, taken to these schools. I don't even know where they were, outside of their culture, their language, beaten. And some of the elders will tell stories about this, being beaten with garden hoses, and laugh. They just laugh. I think it's the ability now as survivors that I don't hear bitterness. They're wary of white people, rightfully so. Not always a trustworthy group.
Yeah.
So trust is hard won, but once it's won, it's fine.
Do they have hope?
Well, the tagline for Simply Smiles is keep hope alive. Some do, but hope is hard to come by because of the level of poverty on the reservation, and quite honestly, to develop economically or with your education, you have to leave. And so it's this is my homeland, but if I want an education and a job, I have to go elsewhere. I have to go into the white world. So part of the hopes of Simply Smiles through the Children's Village is to develop, and this is what Brian, the founder, says, to develop Lakota citizens of the world. So instead of being angry at white people or fearful, you're comfortable moving in the white world because you have education, you have experience, and then you come back and you do something for your community. And you're always going to have to be doing this back and forth between worlds and be conversant in two cultures. It would be fabulous if it was being conversant in two languages, but there's very few Lakota speakers left.
Yes.
There's a real struggle to preserve the language.
How can people become a part of Simply Smiles? What can they do, Betsy?
Well, of course, Jim, you always say donate.
Well, talk to them about that. How do they donate? They go online and
can go online, simplysmiles.org. You have to sort of get through. If you type into your search engine Simply Smiles, you have to get through the dental practices first.
Okay, yeah.
But you will find simplysmiles.org. And also to consider, now that the pandemic is passing and that Simply Smiles is considering starting volunteer groups again, to reach out to the organization to see if you could maybe even put your own group together, or participate in a group, learn about it, and then maybe organize a few more people. So I think it's far more inspiring to be a donor if you've had the direct experience. Mm-hmm. Recognizing that direct experience on these volunteer trips can be very physically demanding, so it's not necessarily open to everybody.
So you are Betsy Van Loon, and you're a Avon Congregational Church, and you have a long-standing association with Simply Smiles. Real quickly, what message would you leave our audience tonight?
Follow me. Doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not, it's good advice. And to take advantage of opportunities, Jim, to do things that are really outside of your comfort zone.
Okay.
And particularly for people, I'm in my mid-60s now, who have the luxury to retire and still be in good health, I encourage you to find your way to give back. That can be in your, or, in your neighborhood, in your community, in the state, around the world, or maybe a little bit of all of the above.
Right.
But we are so blessed with this opportunity in life to take advantage, to give back.
All right.
There's too much just being said that's negative. Let's go do something positive.
All right. My special guest today has been Betsy Van Loon of Simply Smiles. Betsy, thank you so very much for coming and sharing your knowledge, your experiences with that magnificent organization. Everybody has a story. Everybody does. What's yours? Until next time, I'm your host of What's Your Story. I'm James Ransom Reed, Jr. Good night.
The water's warm at Jaws Pond, and we're stocked full of treasures. Big or small, we buy it all. We buy and sell fast rides, power tools, vintage guitars, and so much more. Walk the plank in style with our fine jewelry, diamonds, and watches. Plus, we have a huge selection of the latest video games, including the new PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. Jaws Pond, conveniently located on Meriden Waterbury Turnpike in Southington and West Main Street in New Britain.